as son. Oh, man.
Having played a favorite folk tune, Jerry Garcia improvises on it.
Simple. When I started playing the guitar, the person I played with was a cousin of mine who had actually had band experience and stuff in school, and we both got guitars, little electric guitars from pawn shops. We were both I was 15, I think he was 17. We started banging around together, playing around and learning stuff. And he's the first person who I ever heard use the word improvisation. Improvise, you know. What does that mean? It means just make it up as you go along. Oh, what a great idea, you know. So that was my first exposure to it, which also corresponds with my beginning to actually play the guitar. So for me, you know, I don't know. I don't believe that I could play without improvising on some level. That is to say, that I don't plan ahead. I could never bring myself to actually learn something note for note and play it that way more than once. It's maybe deeply rooted anti-authoritarianism. You know, I don't know what it is, but it's something in my personality just won't allow me to do it.
Grateful Dead came together as a rock band in the 60s from the Bay Area of California. They play a synthesis of American music, including jazz, folk, and blues. Basically a touring band, they see their audience of Deadheads more as extended family than rock music consumers, almost part of the band itself. One reason the Dead command such loyalty is that they perform a different program each night. And within that program, each number is altered through instrumental invention every time it is performed.
If you say, what we're doing here is we're inventing this as we go along, and you are involved in this experience, and it's never going to be this way again. This is it for this particular version of it. There's value to that, and I think our audience is a proof of that. These are people who come back to every performance. If we do 10 days somewhere, a lot of them will be back every night. They know that it's going to be different every night. Sky was yellow and the sun was blue. The band that I'm in, remember, I mean, everybody has the same disease that I have, which is the inability to do something exactly the same way twice. Sometimes it drives you nuts, you know. I mean, if you're composing something and you feel that there's a delicate little interaction that you want to hear, and you always want to hear it, forget it. You know, it doesn't happen in the Grateful Dead, but other stuff does, which is much more wonderful. But you have to be prepared to relinquish a certain amount of your ego involvement with it. You can't, you know, it doesn't help to think of that you're doing real great. You know, it's not necessarily, and it also doesn't help. A lot of times, too, this is another interesting thing. My perception of what's a good night for us may be totally different from everybody else's perception. The audience sometimes has a great night listening to us struggle, feeling that we never quite get together. Sometimes we struggle the whole night without ever feeling like we've really agreed on anything. And sometimes the audience loves that. For them, sometimes that's the best stuff. So reporting is difficult. This starts to bleed over into aesthetics, like what's good music and what isn't. And it starts to get into the world of totally random observations. do our best playing publicly. We don't do our best playing privately, which is backwards from a lot of musicians. There aren't very many bands, certainly, that play rock and roll where improvisation is a large part of what they do. What you have now, masquerading as rock and roll, is in reality safe, popular music. That's largely the work of producers and less the work of musicians. The music business is basically economics. It's basically the thing of when you make a record, you want players that don't make mistakes. You don't necessarily want players that take chances. You want players that don't make mistakes. So because economically that means less time in the studio, you get what you want on the record, and it's, you know, it's safe and it's perfect. And that's kind of been the thrust of music production and popular music, which has sort of co-opted rock and roll. Our audience, I think, illustrates that there's a lot of people who really want a musical experience rather than to be performed at. To my mind, most of performance stuff is really show business. It's entertainment in the sense that there's the passive audience and there's the active performer. And the performer has a show, and they do the show in the same sense that a play is a show. And it's, while it may change, it may vary slightly from performance to performance, it's pretty much the same thing. And that's what most performers gear up to do. That's what their management encourages them to do. And that's what the music business as a whole encourages them to do. So there's really no opening in there. You know, the music business, which has almost nothing to do with music, doesn't encourage improvisation, doesn't encourage taking chances, and it doesn't encourage music which is experimental in nature. It just doesn't.